question when we talk about the Sunni definition of who is a companion was anybody who saw Muhammad before Muhammad died. I'm sorry, any Tom, Dick and Harry seeing Muhammad before he died suddenly becomes a companion, just ridiculous. You know, that's been about the lowest bar you could have. Any person could see Muhammad before he died. I mean, it's getting to the point of being ridiculous. I mean, you know, and the Shia have a slightly, of course, higher bar, but I would argue that anybody who joined the Muslim community after in other words, if they didn't join before the Hijrah, then they should be simply discarded. I mean, you want to get back to a point that, hang on, who are your really hardcore devoted people versus the people who just simply jump on the bandwagon at the last minute because they happen to be the winning side? You know, if you are going to use people, the early community, as a reference point, then you sure as heck have to make damn sure that you're actually going to weed out the people who are actually genuine in their confession of faith and those who simply just jumped on the bandwagon. The same very people who basically end up turning Islam into the status quo, turning into the establishment, and turning into the same sort of repressive mechanism that existed prior to Islam. So, you know, from that point of view, like I've said, when it comes to the Quran and how it's interpreted, when we look at the Hadiths, we have to ask ourselves: is that necessarily the correct way of understanding it? I mean, do the Hadiths necessarily point to, for example, to the Quran having to be interpreted in that particular way, or this idea that somehow we have a Hadith and it has to be retrofitted into the Quran in terms of the interpretation? I mean, I have a look at a lot of the classical texts, and believe me, it's a hell of a leap. It's a hell of a leap when you start, for example, seeing their chapter regarding women, when you start seeing all kinds of jamming in Hadiths to justify premonarchical marriages, to justify arranged marriages, to justify a whole host of basically traditional Bedouin customs retrofitted by Hadith into the Quran. In other words, they can't change the Quran because obviously if you've got several million followers of the Quran, you know, somebody's going to say, well, hang on, Buster, you've just changed the Quran, you little piece of shit. You know, that's what they're going to say. Well, obviously they're not going to say in that, they're going to say in Arabic, but, you know, they're going to say, hang on, you changed the Quran. Well, I've got a copy of the Quran here, you've changed it. But obviously they can't do that, so you end up having this wonderful invention of the Hadiths. You know, you can jam any sort of piece of crap in there as you want, have enough people to claim that, oh yeah, that was genuine, there's about 10 people who know that one. And what do you end up having? You end up having the giant clusterfuck you have today. And there's an unwillingness by Muslims to actually, by so many Muslims willing to challenge the Hadith, because you find the whole edifice of Islam as it exists today with all the institutions are all based on creating bullshit and voodoo, making things to be seen more complicated, more convoluted than it really needs to be. The fact that you have whole institutions and whole traditions that are simply based off hearsay. You know, if you, for example, were really going to set the bar really high on Hadiths, I mean really high, in other words, not just simply, you know, a chain of 3 transmitters, I mean you set it really high, you would end up with probably maybe a book about the size of, oh, that's probably the worst book. You probably end up with a book about this size, if you're lucky, of actual authentic Hadiths. But the question I then ask when they talk about the Hadiths is this: Muhammad continuously talked about the fact, in multiple, within the Quran, also within biographies, is the fact that he continuously reinforced that he was only a human. He was only a fallible human, that he was going to die like everybody else. And Muhammad wasn't just saying this to blow smoke up his ass or, you know, trying to make him feel really humble. He was being honest. I'm a human. I make mistakes. You know, I'm not perfect. And quite frankly, this is the one thing that, you know, one of the things that, you know, one of the reasons, along with the laundry list, I could never be a Muslim, because I see this borderline toe kissing, worshipping of Muhammad to the point that he's this Superman, he's this Jesus crossed with Moses, instead of just saying, well, hang on, he was a human. He was a human who had some radical ideas that really overturned some of the conventions within inside a society. Why not treat him as a human? Why not view him as a human? Why not view him the human with all his good and his bad qualities? You know, why not view it as a struggle of humanity trying to progress and improve itself? Why do you need to add the extra layer of bullshit, this extra layer of worshipping, this toadying and worshipping and toe kissing, and you know, as you see this the kinds of acts of stupidity, people who have pilgrimages to the apparent claimed sandal that was worn by Muhammad, and claims of miraculously healing powers. I mean, this is the kind of stupidity that exists. You know, and every time I hear this, and every time I've talked to my Muslim friends, he ends up saying, you sound a bit like a Salafi. As I said, don't get me wrong, I have nothing wrong with artifacts from the point of view of a historical, educated, reference point. But I do have problems when you start having people having pilgrimages and start doing worshipping and kissing toes and all this kind of crap. It's getting to the point you might as well just start calling it shirk. I mean, you know, this is the thing that frustrates me so much. You know, this point that, you know, we are the absolute monotheists, we believe in Tawheed, and then they start going off in this direction of virtual toe-kissing Muhammad, you know, the salivating and you know, you swear they're going to, it's almost going to be like a, you know, a charismatic mass, people crying and waving their hands in the air and throwing banners around and, you know, just having no sense of moderation. But like I said, just getting back to the Qur'an, and I've gone way off topic, but getting back to the Qur'an, you know, I really have to question, you know, why is the Hadith even required? Now, I understand you've got to have some historical context, but that can be done without the Hadiths. That can be easily achieved without the Hadiths or of any sort. And all you do is you just simply provide the exegetical work would just simply be from the point of view that you provide like as part of the Hadiths that, you know, Surah 9:29, it says at this point in time Muhammad was blah 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 blah. You don't even need to quote the Hadith, just give a historical background to every single ayah. You know, do it. That's all you need to do. If the Quran is meant to be basically a thesis from God to reinforce what had come, to make clarifications, then why the hell do you need the Hadith collection? You know, just think practically to yourself. If the Quran was revealed to people as a single book to provide all the guidance you need, then why the hell do you need a secondary source to tell you and explain the Quran? Why do you need to have, for example, the Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim for starters, just to simply get the basic grasp of many of these things? You know, it really gets to the point you have to ask yourself, you know, how much of this has just simply been tacked on by powers that be who want to justify a certain custom, a certain practice, and they know they can't jam it into the Quran, so the second best thing is to jam it into the Hadith and say, yeah, it's all, you know, these three transmitters of this particular thing, even though it's just a load of crap. You know, at some point you've got to ask yourself, you know, what happens to the person who, for example, wants to convert to Islam, you know, they happen to be, you know, 8th century Bedouin Arab, has a copy of the Quran, don't know how he got the copy of the Quran, but let's say he got the copy of the Quran. How on earth is he going to implement Islam in his own life when the claim is that he also needs to have the Hadith collection? This is, by the way, if it's in the 8th century, it would have been before the Hadith collections even got created, which, you know, opens up even a bigger story. I mean, you know, these are the kinds of questions that really need to be asked. But nobody's going to ask them because fearful that as soon as you start asking these questions, the whole thing will come unravelling. All the people who've been clinged on and added, who've clinged on to the institution of Islam are going to find themselves soon out of a job. You know, it's almost like a bureaucracy. It's the old thing on civilization. The bureaucracy's expanding to support the bureaucracy. You know, how many people do you see inside the Islamic bureaucracy as it exists in the many institutions who are simply there, who are perpetuating basically bullshit to justify their jobs? to add a layer of mystique and bullshit to the story, when actually somebody needs to say to them, hang on, it's not as difficult as you try to make it out to be. You know, we don't need to have all this basically intellectual wankery for something that should be pretty damn basic. You know, if the basic critique of the Qur'an was the point that in the case of Judaism the rabbis had too much control, in the case of Christians that again too much control in the priests and worshipping Jesus as if he was the Son of God, as if he was God incarnated, then it seems that Muslims today haven't actually learnt anything from what the Qur'an has said. They take the advice of people they put up on pedestals without any sort of question and any sort of critique. You sit there, you know, you just need to look at his IKEA Nike video. Thousands upon thousands of people nodding like gormless twits. Oh yeah, that's very true. You know, this is, you know, it just truly is amazing. I really have to, I've always asked myself that if I guarantee you that if you translated a chocolate pudding recipe into a poetic form and then translated into the Quran and into Quranic Arabic, in other words, classical Arabic, and you said it to a crowd of people, a random crowd of Muslims, I'll guarantee you they'll believe that it's come directly from the Quran itself. That's how out of touch the average person is when it comes to reading it. You've got people in Southeast Asia who never read the Quran. They have it sitting on the top bookshelf as if it has some sort of woo-woo voodoo powers that protect their whole house from it. I mean, it truly is amazing to see that kind of stupidity in action. You know, and that's the other reason why I'd never want to become a Muslim, because I'd be surrounded by stupidity 24/7, and it'd just be something I would not be able to tolerate. You know, I tolerate stupidity at work because I get paid to tolerate it, but tolerating it willingly would be, you know, and I'm not getting paid, would be just really pushing the envelope. Anyway, I'll just stop there, and I'd love to hear your feedback.